Welcome everybody to already the third and final team booster video for the Dutch Hacking Health Hack Corona initiative. Some of you might already know me, but for those who don't, my name is Damien Nunes and I'm a service designer and trainer at the University of Maastricht. Well, in the previous videos, I've already introduced the double diamond method, and we're today going to talk a little bit more about this. So in the first video, we gave you more an introduction on design thinking and the double diamond, where in the second video, we'll move more into understanding the context and coming up to a specific design challenge. And now in this third video, we're going to move into designing the solution. Well, let's get moving with that. So designing the solution is all about moving from a specific design challenge to a specific solution. And there are basically four things that we're going to address in this session right now. So the first aspect is ideation. And ideation is on one hand about generating ideas and on the other aspect on choosing ideas. But we go into that in a little bit more detail later. Second aspect is prototyping, the different ways to prototype, and I'm going to give you some examples on that as well. And then we have validation, what can you validate, but also how can you validate. And the fourth one is implementation, scale in and startup. Startup means I'm going to do it myself. Scale in is basically I need another partner to help me with that, or maybe this organization can take it over. Well, it's very important that you have your problem definition ready. This problem definition might change during this project. That's fine, and that often happens, but you should have now already went through the first diamond where you understood the context. If not, I would really urge you to really take some time in defining your problem definition. All right, but for now, let's move forward with ideation. The how might we question is already a very practical tool to spark creativity. So for instance, you're trying to improve the experience for children undergoing an MRI scan. You could frame the challenge as such as how might we lower the anxiety of children undergoing an MRI scan? Well, when I'm going to ask you that question, you might already come up with ideas. But I got some examples here of various companies that took up this challenge and came up with ideas. The first example is of a digital product. And this is a product created by Siemens, and it's the so-called My MRI Pass. And this is an app for children to basically show in this app what they're afraid of, what are they going to bring, and this information is then passed to the specialist. So this means that the specialist can better make preparations for the child, so he or she can basically lower the anxiety of the child. A second example is of a physical product. So Lego took the same challenge and they came up with a so-called I Love MRI Lego kit. So this kit is then also sent to the child beforehand. The child can already play with it, has an understanding how big this machine is, where are his or her parents, for instance, and by doing so can already visualize how the experience is going to look like. Well, a digital product, a physical product, how about creating actually a service or experience? How about creating a pirate experience connected to your MRI scan? Well, maybe we could already send a treasure map where the journey would begin with a little eye patch where the child can already embark on the journey from home, coming at the clinic where he or she sees the specialist with a little parrot on the shoulder where he and she is going to be briefed on this treasure hunt they are going to embark on. And then when they are, for instance, coming into the room where the MRI scanner is, they see a cartoon like a pirate ship where the child is going in. So this is a different way of, for instance, solving the same challenge. I don't know which one is more impactful, but that is something you should also explore with your own challenge, with the ideas that you're going to create by yourself. So coming up with different ideas is so-called divergent thinking, or better said, thinking in options. And that's why it's called a double diamond. And we basically go broad to generate more ideas. So with ideation, we're always going to focus initially on quantity over quality. We want to have as many ideas on the table on which we can reflect. And we can only do that if we postpone our judgment. And this not only postponing our judgment with regard to the ideas of others, but it's also very important that we postpone our judgment on our own ideas. Some people can already they come up with an idea and they say, well, this will never work, etc. And this limits basically their creativity flow. It's important to get into this creativity flow where you come up with ideas just left and right, and you don't know if they are good or not, but you just get into this looseness of creating as many ideas as possible. And that is very important. Another aspect is that you need to use all your knowledge. Don't look at this only from a professional point of view, but maybe you can also use your experiences of your journeys, your travels. So maybe you saw something in Thailand, maybe you saw something in the USA, and maybe that can really also help to come up with new ideas. Maybe different domains, different sectors. Also, some of your team members are not from the context. So also bringing that perspective to the table and coming up with digital products, services, or for instance, physical products. So be also creative in that. Often when we think of brainstorming, we think about sitting around the table and then just throwing ideas left and right. But I would really urge you to also take the time to do individual brainstorming, or so-called silent brainstorming. Maybe just taking 10 minutes where everybody's gonna write down as many ideas based on your design challenge. So by doing so, say for instance you are in a group of 5, you can work at least 5 times faster than if you would do then also in group dynamics, and you are not biased and influenced by others. It's better to start with a first individual brainstorm, and from there also share the ideas from where you could build upon each other. And then you can make combinations, and then maybe an idea that was not so valuable for you might spark something creative with one of your team members. And the last point is very important, to store your ideas. It might be that you need to go back, you need to go forward, etc. And then you can always go back to the ideas that you have in your vault. The further you move through the project, the better you understand the context, and then you can always see like that idea that seemed not very feasible or desirable might actually work. So always store your ideas in your idea vault. A very practical tool that you can apply to further deepen, improve, or enrich your original ideas is to use the so-called scamper method. So the scamper method has, for every letter, there's an action that you could apply to your idea. So for instance, if we take the S of substitute, you could think about what could I actually substitute in my product, in my process, or in my journey, for instance, to improve the overall outcome. Or what could I combine? I already gave the example, for instance, of pirate, maybe a Peter Pan experience and MRI. Maybe there are different combinations you can make, and you have to then also make combinations with other example of ideas, personal experience. I mean, inspiration can come from everywhere. What could you adapt? What maybe you could modify? Maybe you can increase something, maybe you can minimize something, make something work faster or slower. What kind of impact would that basically have on your idea? Put to another use. Maybe you can take something from another sector to this sector or to this context. So how can you use different products, different objects, different processes, but then apply it to this context? What could you eliminate? So maybe you've mapped out a patient journey, and maybe you could eliminate some moments there, and that can make the process a lot more easy. But it also is the same for instance, if you come up with a product, certain features that you could eliminate. And lastly, it's the R of reverse. What could you maybe change process-wise, or maybe you could also even flip your whole product, and it becomes something different. Okay, another tool is what would X do? And it's basically taking the perspective of, for instance, an organization, but it can also be a person or, for instance, an expert. So if you, for instance, take the perspective of Disney, Disney is all about creating experiences, enjoyable experiences. Well, how could you apply that way of thinking, that way of storytelling, then also to your context? Or maybe it is, for instance, a Formula One team. So, how can you maybe apply the principle of a pit stop to this context? But maybe you can think about Airbnb, or maybe it's Spotify, or maybe it's Tinder. There are so many companies and perspectives that you could take. Also very important to list those and then just try to come up with multiple ideas. And another tool, very pragmatic, but really helps, is just to do an inspiration hunt. And then it's also very nice to then also spread out that everybody gets his or her own inspiration. Go on Google, look up best practice cases. There are also a lot of websites where you can get some creative ideas specifically built for this. So if you are getting stuck and you get frustrated, no worries, open your laptop, go on Google, and go on the so-called inspiration hunt. So, ideation, like I said before, is not only about generating ideas, because choosing ideas is at least as important. So, you need also to know how to prioritize. So one way to prioritize, you can do with the prioritization matrix. So you can choose two dimensions. So for instance, the impact of an idea, and the other dimension here is, for instance, the feasibility of an idea. And you could basically write down all ideas on digital post-its, I reckon, works best now in this situation. So you can use, for instance, Miro for that, for doing that in a group setting. And you can map your ideas basically in this matrix, share them and map them. And it's all fine if you just use your intuition on how ideas relate to each other. Is this idea a little bit more feasible, less feasible, more impact, yes or no? That's sometimes just an intuition, and that is fine. Another tool that you can use is a so-called NUF test, and NUF stands for novel, usable, and feasible. These are just three criteria. Maybe you want to add other criteria, or maybe novel is maybe not even so interesting. Maybe a straightforward idea is also very good for this context, and it's maybe more about, for instance, impact. So choose the criteria very wisely, put them in also in the various columns, and then you could on in the rows you can then put in the various ideas, just a short name, for instance, and then you could start grading them, and then also calculating what the total number, for instance, is. And by doing so, you can, for instance, see, wow, maybe you want to focus on the idea that has the highest score. So this is more the rational option. It's the idea in the top right quadrant, for instance, of this matrix, or with the highest score. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that is the idea you're gonna focus on. Sometimes through this kind of dynamic, um, you start a conversation, and then and that's, I think, also the whole goal of these kind of matrices, these kind of prioritization tools, is to start a discussion and see what works and doesn't. And so it's also very nice to just choose a more intuitive option, right? So because there are still a lot of assumptions here, you don't know yet if ID number two is better than ID number three. This is still based on intuition and on assumptions. So if you, for instance, choose for an idea that is a little bit less scored, that's fine, because you're going to find out later in this process which one will work better or not. And lastly, you have an explorative option where you maybe can also choose an idea which is more harder, just to find out if it actually, to better understand the context. Is this idea actually that hard to implement? Or will it actually generate this little, for instance, value? And this can really also help to better understand the design space and what actually influences um, the impact for that you want to create, basically. But for now, I think it's very important to focus more on an intuitive options. And if you're not able, out of this team dynamic, to make a choice on what idea to focus, you can always move to a more democratic way of coming to a conclusion. So this is called democracy, where everybody is maybe given three dots, and they can allocate them to ideas, and then you just see, well, what ideas have the most dots, and then you are able to move forward. It is nevertheless very important that everybody is on board. So maybe your idea has not been chosen, but I think it's more important that in the end we drive impact together. So I think it's very important that everybody needs to be on the same page and that agree that, okay, we are going to move further instead of debating what idea to choose. So from choosing an idea, you can start prototyping because you're still quite on a high level and you really need to see, well, how is this thing actually gonna work? So when you do prototyping, you can of course also use the tools that you used in the previous phase. So the journey maps you can use, you can adapt maybe to accommodate your new idea or process flow or your service blueprint. So say for instance, on the top, this is the journey as it is right now. Maybe you can make a shortcut. Or maybe you want to change touch point number of touch point B. You want to change, for instance, something new. That is where basically your intervention is going to take place. Or maybe you want to reorder some touch points or you reorder some moments in this journey. Or maybe you want to eliminate or delete a point, or maybe you want to add a different kind of, you want to focus on a different kind of user or patient. That's all, for instance, possible. So from there you can create also a new map of working with them. This is still on a very abstract level, more process level, but if you want to make it even more tangible, you can just create, for instance, a storyboard. Um, and this is, you can do with paper prototype. And just by sketching it out, this is just an example of how an innovation team, within a matter of a few minutes, created a storyboard and made it just a little bit more concrete so we can really also better validate what is the value of it. You can also then show these storyboards to, for instance, hospital staff, for instance, or maybe even patients. And from there, you could get feedback what works and what doesn't work. And you need to be creative also. How do you get that interaction with, for instance, the groups you are focusing on? Cool. So with prototyping, you also have different methods to go even a layer deeper. So if you want to zoom, for instance, in on a certain touch point, a certain moment in the journey, you could, for instance, use wireframing. So if there's, for instance, a digital product or an app or whatever part of this whole experience, you can now also really work out the various screens in it. I really encourage also the non-designers in your team to also engage in this. Don't let only the designer work on it. If you have an idea, just take a piece of paper, sketch it out, scan it in, or just take a picture and then also explain it with the group. It's very important everybody engages in this process. Another way is to create mock-ups. So if it's not a digital, more physical product, you can just, yeah, with some cardboard or material that's lying around. Also, you as a non-designer can go out there and also have more practical experience in what you want to create. If it's more how you want to influence behavior or how, for instance, certain stakeholders are going to behave or act, you could also, for instance, design a script. How, for instance, nurses need to treat certain patients or people. And so that is also something you can just write out and be very specific on those kind of aspects. And if you have created that, you could even do some role playing, also actually see, well, what happens if somebody is going to act this out? How are people, objects, interfaces working together in realizing this value and solving the challenge you are focused on? So by doing so, you better understand how does it work. You also have a better feeling on like how does it actually look. So is it attractive? Yes or no? Does it actually play a role here? but also how does it feel? Also this tactical, the more this very tangible value, interaction with an object is very important, which can also help you to better understand well what features and details are needed, what is very critical to be part of your solution and what not. So you can also make better priorities on that because every feature is extra work and maybe also makes your product or service more complex. Be very critical what you want to include and what not. Cool. So you already worked with your hands and started also to make that idea come alive. But there's still a lot of still a lot of assumptions that need to be validated. So some of those assumptions might live in the domain of desirability. So asking the question, how do we know that people actually want this? How do we know that? What are the assumptions that are underlying, and how do we know that they actually want the value that you're trying to deliver? Another aspect is about feasibility. How do we know we can make this? So here's also the prototyping come into play to really see how does it actually work? Can we actually make this? Another aspect is then the viability, is how do we know that others or we ourselves can organize and sustain this? So we can design it and it looks pretty, but in the end, it needs to be implemented. And by doing so, we ourselves need to get into action, or for instance, we need to engage a hospital to adopt this solution, for instance. So it's very important to see also how are they going to organize it, but also how can they sustain it. Maybe also financial aspect plays a big role there. And when this is all in balance, well, how do we know people can, but also actually will use it? Maybe you created this great app, and but if it's not, if they cannot use it or they don't use it because of other reasons that are very important also to look into. So for validation, I think it's very important that opinion, only asking if stakeholders like or dislike it is not enough. Behavior is not always the same as an opinion. So that's why experimentation is very important. So if you have designed a solution, it's very important to extrapolate what are the assumptions. What are things within the domain of desirability, feasibility, viability, and usability that can make or break your solution. And then you also need to design a test or a pilot, and maybe people within the field can help you to bring that idea to the actual field and see how it works. They can provide hands-on feedback basically on what works and what didn't work, or maybe it's a live stream and you can look from it at it from a distance, for instance. And then with that insight, which can be quantitative in the sense of data. But I think for this hackathon, I think it's very important that we look more at the qualitative results, right? So that can be quotes and other things, for instance, that people said that you can use to better understand what works and what doesn't. But more important, why does it work and why not? So, in order to create this constant cycle in improving your idea, you can use the PDCA cycle as I think very nice way to making sure you go through this. I'll also give you some other tools at the end of this presentation. Well, from validation, you might now know that your idea will and can provide a lot of value. We still need to move to implementation. And as I said before, it might be that it's a startup, it's your own idea, and you need to kickstart this initiative yourself in order to drive that value, or it's going to be a scale in, and that's why it shows here also the trailer. You need to connect this idea or implement this idea within a different context. So for a startup, I mean, I could talk about this topic for hours, for days, but I think just to get you in the right mindset, it's very important to ask yourself the question: if you're going to do it yourself, do you have enough, and do you also have the right resources, but also the right human resource? Do you have the right team, and do you have the right funding, for instance, or resources to make this a success? Yes or no? But also, how are you going to reach your target audience. Mobility is an issue. We have to do majority of our work digitally. So I think that is very important also. How do you reach your target audience? Another aspect for scaling, on the other hand, you need to see, well, what stakeholders do you need to get on board? Is it a hospital? Is it are there other stakeholders, for instance, the government? And well, who are they actually? But also, how can you actually mobilize them? So, what are their priorities? What are their needs? Because you maybe ask a lot from them, and then it's also very important that your solution is also yeah, basically targeting their priorities. So for both, it's very important to connect with the stakeholders, define then also who the stakeholders are. Maybe there are partners for you if you are thinking about a startup, or maybe otherwise it's also then the one, if you talk about scale it, well, where do you want to actually scale it in? Be clear and realistic. So also here, well, first we had very much a focus on the end user, for instance, or the patient. But now it's also very important to also have more an organization perspective also, and also be clear and realistic here. And that also means you also need to be agile to changes here. So they might also have certain specifications, some things we need to take into consideration. And yeah, we need to be as flexible there as we are with our end user. And it's very important to stop when successful. So this continuous improving is very important. So you can then also use methods from Lean or Lean Startup and Agile, and I'm sure there are multiple team members that are familiar with these terms and know how to actually implement it. But then you already have an idea how you can also move forward. So I'll give you here an overview with all the tools. And there are a lot that you can use. I don't think you need to use them all. So I think in the end it's very important also here to stay pragmatic. All right, then a final thing before I wrap up this video is the so-called valley of despair. So if you move through this project, it goes up, it goes down, and etc. And sometimes when you're coming into this valley of despair, where the emotions are more negative because you cannot see where you're going, it's very important that you're still gonna move forward. And you can only move forward if you also document, for instance, the context, if you really also understand, like, okay, what did I actually learn, and etc. So that is also very important. Have your ideas, have your research always present, and try to keep it as up to date as possible. And on the other hand, also stay optimistic. So also maybe also stepping back from the idea for a couple of minutes, just to maybe have a team exercise to get new energy in, maybe get everybody just walking, or yeah, just get, for instance, a little bit of fresh air, and from there also move forward. And I'm saying this because we see in a lot of projects it goes up and down, and we need to get that momentum going. So that's why I want to also end with this quote by Thomas Edison. With regard to innovation and coming up with new ideas, he said basically, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. So also here it's very important to don't have a very strong connection to your ideas. In the end, it's not about ideas. It's not about if I came up with the best idea. It's in the end about helping people. So you have to learn also from your mistakes. It's, I think, of course, very, very important. Another quote that he mentioned is, many of life's failures are people who did not realize how close they were to success when they gave up. So if you also look at this curve, success can be just around the corner. So also for this hackathon, I would really encourage you to really put the pedal to the metal and really try to do your best. And sometimes you're already done in just a couple of hours maybe, or days where maybe others really need to push it until the finishing line. So it's very important to really move forward, keep optimistic, and also help each other out when maybe team dynamics go lower. Okay, cool. That was then also the last video. I really wish you all success and also enjoy this moment. It's a nice way to also to meet new people and to do cool stuff. And I'm really looking forward to the end result. And I want to just finish here with let's make some positive impact. Have a good day.